Safety zones are the final component to complete the LCES system. The idea of a safety zone is often misunderstood. Safety zones are pre-planned locations where firefighters can find refuge from expected danger. Fire shelter deployment sites have been incorrectly called safety zones. There is a huge difference. The use of a fire shelter is only a survival alternative. Tactics must never be developed around the use of deployment sites. A safety zone is an area where fire shelters are not needed for firefighters to be safe from expected fire behavior. Simply stated, the effectiveness of a safety zone is determined by how far the firefighters can be removed from the heat source. However, there are some basic considerations that will help you evaluate the suitability of a safety zone. Every good safety zone has three elements. First, allow for the flaming front distance. This will be determined by what type of fuels are burning and the actual flame lengths that you're observing. Second, assess the heat impact distance. This is more difficult because it's not observable. You're trying to anticipate the potential heat output of the fire and how far it will be transferred into your safety zone. Last, you must determine the actual safe area. This is where everyone will be when the fire passes around your safety zone. You must think carefully about how many people and pieces of equipment you can really stuff into that area and still maintain your flaming front and heat impact distances. As the fire passes around your safety zone, the direction of heat impact may change, first hitting the front, then the side, and finally the rear of the safety zone. When you look at your safety zone, visualize yourself there, without your fire shelter and other personal protective equipment. If you would feel safe with the fire burning around your selected location, then you have a true safety zone. Let's go back and examine the heat impact distance. This is very important because the inhalation of superheated air and gases are responsible for many more firefighter fatalities than burn injuries. Heat transfer into a safety zone will come from three sources. Radiant heat from the combustion of fuels is the first heat source to evaluate. In flat terrain with no wind, the heat impact distance would be determined solely by the radiant heat generated from the fuels that are burning. The radiation intensity drops as the distance from the fire increases. Of course, the problem of heat transfer into safety zones is made more complex by convective heat transfer. So the second heat source to consider is convection due to wind. A strong wind can blow lethal heat several hundred feet into a safety zone. A safety zone that's located downwind of the fire will need to allow for a much larger heat impact distance than one located upwind or on the flank of that same fire. The third heat source is convection due to slope. A safety zone that's located mid-slope above the fire will be subject to the rising movement of hot air. In addition to slope, other topographic features can increase heat impact. Saddles tend to increase wind speed. Not only can superheated air be blown into a poorly located safety zone, but fire intensity may increase significantly in areas adjacent to a saddle. Chutes or chimneys can cause extremely rapid rates of spread due to preheating of fuels and channeling of winds. Consider all fire suppression operations in the vicinity of a chute or chimney to be dangerous. As you can see, it's important to consider both size and location when selecting a safety zone. A safety zone in a good location may reduce the size requirements significantly in comparison to one in a poor location. At the end of this video segment, you'll discuss safety zone sites in more detail. But there's one other item we should talk about here. The burned area of a fire is considered the primary safety zone in many situations. This is a major advantage of using direct attack strategies. However, you must ensure the burned area you are calling a safety zone is a clean burn, with very little flammable vegetation remaining. Do not use areas that have only partially burned as safety zones. Likewise, look at the fuels when attempting to carry your safety zone with you by firing out. This tactic works extremely well in light grass fuels, but residual heat in timber and heavy brush fuel types can remain lethal for several hours after ignition. On August 5, 1949, 12 smoke jumpers and 1 local firefighter were killed on the Man Gulch fire in Montana. The group was attempting initial attack and were working their way down from the head of the canyon where they had landed in order to get below the fire burning on the ridgetop to the south. The route of travel took the group into a large unburned drainage with continuous cured tall grass and stringers of pine trees. As they worked farther down the drainage, the fire activity increased in response to late afternoon conditions and turbulent river canyon winds. The fire then spotted into the bottom of the drainage below them. Upon seeing the rapidly building spot fires below them, the group turned and attempted to run back up canyon and over the crest of the ridge to the north. In the flashy grass fuels, the fire spread quickly, overrunning most of the group before they could reach the ridge to the north. 3 individuals did survive. It took about 30 minutes for the entire drainage to burn out. There was no place identified as a safety zone in that drainage, and the result was another of our expensive lessons learned. This is all old history, to be sure. Look at the dates. We should know better today, but we continue to make the same mistakes. The summer of 1994 leaves us with 14 fatalities on a hill in Colorado not far from the Battlement Creek fire. 14 that were considered our most elite and knowledgeable firefighters: hell attack, hot shot, and smoke jumper. Repeating these same mistakes: unsafe downhill line construction tactics, inadequate lookouts, and no safety zones.
Can we make firefighting perfectly safe? Well, not 100%. We can't do much about topography, weather, and in the foreseeable future at least, fuels. But we do have control over one final element in the equation. That is the human element. We must review our perceptions of what fire is and is not. Fires, even when they get big, are rarely a disaster. The only time one becomes a disaster is when it manages to catch and kill someone. Think about how you conduct your tactics in the fire environment, and be sure to establish lookouts, communications, escape routes, and safety zones every time you attack a fire.